The great hall of the Vayari Palace glittered like a cage of light. Tall crystal pillars shone, the golden floor reflected every face, and the air smelled of strange burning flowers meant to honor the gods. But Princess Yalara felt no beauty in that place. To her, it was only a prison. Her silver veil covered most of her face, but it could not hide her trembling hands. Every step she took toward the altar felt heavier than the last. The voices of her people echoed in her ears. Not cheers but whispers, sharp, biting, and cruel. She must wed the human. It is the price of peace. Better her than war. Her heart pounded like a trapped bird. The Vayari Empire had been proud once. They ruled star systems with ships of shining metal and soldiers of fire. But war had broken them, and now their leaders whispered of weakness. The humans had not been their strongest enemy, yet somehow they had been the hardest to defeat. Humanity did not bow. Humanity did not stop. They bled, and yet they still kept fighting. To the Vayari, it was both frightening and shameful to lose against a species they once called primitive. Now the war was over. Peace had come, but peace always carried a price. That price was Yalara. She was to marry a human commander, not because of love, not even because of choice. She was a tool, a bridge, a living contract between two peoples who did not trust one another. Her people believed she should be grateful. Was she not still a princess? Would she not sit on a throne beside her new husband? But to Yalara, the crown on her head felt like a chain, and the throne she was promised felt like a cage. She had heard stories of humans all her life, brutal, wild, untamed, creatures of instinct rather than reason. The soldiers who returned from the front told tales of how humans fought like storms, screaming, charging, refusing to die even when pierced by a dozen blades. They were stubborn, dangerous animals that looked too much like people. And now one of those creatures was to share her life, her bed, her name. Yalara's throat tightened. She wanted to run, to scream, to beg her father to release her. But she could not. An empire's pride rested on her shoulders. If she broke, the treaty would break with her. Her people would suffer more war. And so she walked forward, each step dragging her closer to a man she had never met, a human whose face she feared to see. The chamber's doors opened wide. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd as the human groom entered, Commander Elias Wren. He was tall, broader than most Vayari men, his skin a shade touched by sun, his eyes sharp yet unreadable. His robes were ceremonial, but they could not hide the scars on his hands. To Yalara, those scars spoke of violence, of battles she did not want to imagine. She lowered her gaze quickly, her veil hiding her fear. When the priests called for silence, she braced herself. She expected the human to reach for her, to claim her like a prize. But instead, Elias bowed. Not a shallow nod, not the polite tilt of the head common to treaties, but a full bow, his head lowered deeply, his posture humble. The room fell quiet. Even Yalara blinked in surprise. She did not understand. Humans were supposed to be wild. Humans were supposed to be untamed. Why did this one lower himself before her? The words of union were spoken. Her hands were placed into his. She flinched, at the warmth of his skin, expecting a grip of iron, a forceful claim. But his hold was gentle, steady, yes, but not crushing. Almost careful. Her heart raced with confusion. She had prepared herself for cruelty, for harshness, for a husband who would remind her every day that she was no more than a treaty gift. But in that moment, all she felt was restraint. For the first time, Yalara dared to lift her eyes just a little. She saw not hunger or cruelty in the human's gaze, but something far stranger, far more dangerous. She saw kindness, and that frightened her more than anything. Commander Elias Wren stood at the edge of the grand hall, his posture straight, but relaxed. The humans who served under him had trained him to move with strength, with discipline, with command. But here, in the presence of the Vayari court and their golden walls, he felt the weight of something more delicate than battle. He had fought wars, seen friends fall, survived storms of fire and metal. but nothing had prepared him for the fear and tension radiating from the alien princess before him. Yalara did not look at him. Her eyes were lowered, hidden behind the silver veil. Every tiny movement she made was precise, careful, as if one wrong step could trigger disaster. She walked slowly toward him, her heart hammering with dread. The humans called this being on guard. But she did not know the language or the comfort it brought. To her, every motion of his body was unknown, unpredictable, frightening. The Veyari priests chanted softly, their voices blending into the hum of the palace. It was a ceremony meant to bind two worlds, two species, together. Yet to Yalara, it felt like a snare closing around her chest. She had dreamed in the quiet nights of her childhood of love, of choice, of happiness. But those dreams were stripped from her now. Her fate was sealed by the politics of empires, by the need to prevent bloodshed. Elias noticed her tension. He could feel it even through the formal rituals, through the eyes of the court. His training told him to be strong, to dominate, to show power, but something in him refused. This was not a battle. This was a person, a life. He moved forward, slowly when the priests instructed, not aggressively, not with force, but with care. His hand hovered near hers and he waited. He did not rush her. He did not demand her attention or obedience. He only allowed her the space to breathe, to exist without fear. That small gesture, his patience, his respect, was confusing to her. Yalara had expected him to be violent, to claim her as his prize. She had expected fire, harshness, the strength humans were known for, but he offered none of that. He offered calm. He offered gentleness, and it was terrifying. The first time their hands touched, it was almost an accident. Her fingers brushed against his. She recoiled slightly, instinctively, ready to pull away. But he held his hand still, giving her the choice to step back, to let go. "You do not need to fear me," he said softly, his voice low but steady, carrying across the hall to her ears alone. "You are not a prisoner here." The words were simple, but they carried a weight far heavier than the gold of the palace, far more binding than the ceremonial chains of marriage. Yalara froze. She had been trained to obey, to fear, to survive in a world ruled by warriors and cunning rulers. But here was a human, tall, strong, alien in every way, telling her that she had freedom, that she had choice. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She wanted to demand that the humans leave, that the treaty be voided, that everything return to the life she had known. But her legs would not move. Her heart would not calm. She was paralyzed between terror and fascination, a feeling she did not understand. The priests continued their chants, but for a moment the world fell silent around her. She could hear her own breath, quick and shallow, and the faint rhythm of the human's pulse under his ceremonial robes. That heartbeat was steady, unwavering, unthreatening. Yet it stirred something inside her she could not name. Something she had never felt before. Hope, the court whispered, but Yalara did not hear them. She only felt the presence of Elias, patient, waiting and unwilling to impose himself upon her. That patience, that care, that refusal to dominate. It was alien to her, more frightening than any battle she had imagined. And yet, it was the first thing that made her think that perhaps, just perhaps, a human could be more than what her people feared. Elias had come into her life as a soldier, as a representative of a species she was taught to fear, but in that moment, standing across from her in the Golden Hall, he was something else entirely. He was a man who chose kindness when cruelty would have been easy. He was a warrior who understood that strength was not always about force, but about restraint. Yalara lifted her gaze for the first time ever so slightly. The golden light of the palace reflected in his eyes, and for a fleeting moment the world seemed to pause. She saw no monster there. She saw a human who had fought, who had lived, who had chosen to meet her not with power but with patience. And she wondered if she could survive this war of hearts that had only just begun. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and violet. Inside the palace, the golden hallways grew quiet, the echoes of ceremony fading into a soft hum of anticipation, Princess Yalara was led to her chamber, a room larger than any she had known, filled with soft silk sheets, cushions, and glowing lamps that shimmered like captured stars. It should have felt like a gift, a place of comfort, but to Yalara it felt like a cage, gilded and beautiful, yet trapping her in a destiny she did not choose. Her fingers trembled as she brushed the silken fabric, each movement careful, measured, fearful. She had been trained to obey, to endure, to serve the Empire's will, but the presence of a human husband waiting for her made her feel like a child again, small and unprepared. The door opened, and Elias stepped inside. His uniform of command had been replaced with simple ceremonial robes. His face was calm, tired, yet full of a gentleness she could not comprehend. He did not approach her immediately. He did not demand her attention. Instead, he stepped to the side of the room, hands folded, waiting for her to decide what she would do. Yalara's heart raced. She expected him to seize control, to remind her of the stories she had been told of human strength and unyielding will. But Elias did none of that. He simply stood there, letting her move first, letting her breathe. "Sit," he said softly, motioning to a chair near the window. His voice was quiet, not commanding, but inviting. She obeyed, though slowly, as if each step required courage she was unsure she had. He watched her with patience, not with judgment. "You do not need to fear me," he said. "Tonight is not about ceremony or duty. You may rest. I will keep watch." The words were almost too simple to be real. Rest? Keep watch? Not command, not demand, not claim. Her mind recoiled at the thought that a human could be so gentle, so respectful, so unthreatening. She nodded, uncertain, and lowered herself onto the silk cushions. She curled slightly, her knees drawn to her chest, instinctively protecting herself. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The stories of humans had prepared her for violence, for fire, for chaos, but nothing had prepared her for stillness, for patience, for calm. Elias moved to the far side of the room, near the door, and sat silently. He did not sleep, but his eyes were soft, his expression careful, unassuming. He waited while she adjusted, while she faced the terror of her own expectations. She expected his hands to reach for her, his words to command her. She expected him to be fierce. But instead he offered quiet, a kind of strength she had never seen in warriors or kings. Hours passed. Yalara could not sleep. She listened to the slow rhythm of his breathing, the faint sound of movement as he shifted in the chair to stay comfortable. Each time she expected him to lean closer, to speak harshly, to take what he could. He did not. Each time, he gave her space, respect, and an unspoken promise that her fear would not be taken lightly. For the first time in years, Yalara felt the tension in her chest ease. Her shoulders relaxed ever so slightly. Her hands stopped trembling. The stories she had been told, the warnings, the fears, they were all being challenged by the quiet truth of this human. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her. She drifted into a light sleep, curled in the silken sheets. Elias watched her, the candlelight reflecting off the scars on his hands. He had survived battles that had killed others, faced enemies who were ruthless and unforgiving. Yet he understood that the greatest battle was the one for trust, and Yalara's trust had not been earned by force, but by patience, by restraint, by gentle presence. He did not move to touch her, to claim her, to dominate her. He simply stayed vigilant, his eyes scanning the room, his body ready to protect, yet never to intimidate. That single act, more than any sword or shield, began to plant a seed of something Yalara had thought impossible: safety. And in that safety, fragile and new, she dreamed, not of fear, not of war, but of possibility. She dreamed that perhaps this human was not the monster she had been warned about. Perhaps he could be something more. Perhaps in time, she could learn to see him not as a threat, but as a companion, a protector, a partner in ways her heart had never imagined. For the first night, she slept without screaming, without trembling, without imagining the worst. And in that small victory, she realized something profound. Trust, even when hesitant, could be stronger than fear. Days passed in the Golden Palace, yet for Princess Yalara, each day felt like a lifetime. She moved through the corridors with careful steps, her silver veil brushing the floor, hiding her face from the eyes of courtiers and servants. Yet no veil could hide the storm of emotions inside her heart. Fear and doubt wrestled with curiosity and a strange, reluctant fascination. Commander, Elias Wren remained a constant presence. He did not demand her attention, nor did he attempt to rush the distance between them. He spoke rarely, only when necessary, and always in a calm, measured tone. The other humans who had accompanied him were busy with their duties, but he stayed, by her side in subtle ways, holding the door, offering a gentle word, waiting patiently. Yalara found herself watching him in secret. She noticed how his hands moved, careful and precise, how his eyes softened when he saw someone in need, how he carried himself not with arrogance, but with quiet strength. She had expected fire and cruelty, yet all she saw was patience and understanding. One morning, as she attempted to pour water from a delicate crystal pitcher, her hands shook. The cup slipped from her grasp and shattered on the marble floor. Her heart leapt, expecting anger, expecting a shout, expecting punishment. Instead, Elias knelt beside her, picking up the pieces carefully. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly, his eyes concerned, not frustrated. Yalara's breath caught. That simple question, a question of her well-being rather than her mistake, pierced the armor she had built around her heart. She had expected him to claim control, to scold her for clumsiness, to remind her that she was now his by law and duty. Instead, he cared. I'm fine," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, not wide, not showy, but gentle, almost tender. "It's all right, accidents happen, you are safe." For the first time, Yalara felt something shift. A tiny crack appeared in the wall of fear she had built around herself. She had been taught that humans were unpredictable, dangerous and ruthless, and yet here was one, showing her care, showing her restraint, showing her that strength could exist without domination. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the alien mountains visible through her chamber window, Yalara confronted him, quietly. "Why do you not take what you are owed?" she asked, her voice trembling, a mix of frustration and bewilderment. "Why do you not demand obedience? Why are you so gentle?" Elias looked at her, his expression calm, his eyes steady. He had learned in countless battles that the fiercest warriors were not always those who struck hardest, but those who understood when to wait, when to act, when to hold back. "Because you are not something to be owed," he said softly. "You are someone to be cherished. No law or treaty can change that. I do not claim you because I can. I choose you in every way that matters." Yalara's chest tightened. His words felt like a strange wind, blowing against the walls she had built around her heart. She had expected domination, she had expected fear, she had expected the cold formality of duty. But she had not expected this. Over the next days, small moments continued to accumulate. When she strolled through the palace gardens, he walked beside her without touching her, giving her freedom to explore. When she spoke, he listened. When she needed quiet, he waited. Each act, small and seemingly ordinary, carried weight. Each act chipped away at the fear she had been carrying for her entire life. One night, as they walked along the balcony under a sky full of unfamiliar stars, she finally dared to speak what had been simmering inside her. "I was afraid of you," she admitted softly. "I thought you would destroy me, that you would break me, that you would take what I am by force." Elias turned to her, the pale starlight reflecting in his eyes. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed a lock of hair from her face. "I would never destroy you. You are not an enemy, nor a prize. You are someone I have chosen to protect. And I will do so without harming your heart or your freedom." Her breath caught. The gentleness of his touch, the sincerity in his voice, the patience in his gaze. These were weapons far stronger than any sword or shield. They disarmed her completely. For the first time since the treaty had been signed, Yalara began to believe that a human could be more than a creature of war. She began to believe that trust, patience, and care could exist even across species, even across empires. And she began to feel something she had never allowed herself to feel: hope. The walls around her heart had not fallen completely, but cracks had appeared. And through those cracks, light began to enter, soft and warm, promising a future she had never dared to imagine. Peace was fragile. The halls of the Veyari palace were filled with whispers and quiet judgments. Many courtiers watched Yalara with sharp eyes, murmuring that she had betrayed her people by showing even the smallest sign of trust toward the human who had married her. Others warned that Elias might be patient now, but humans were clever, cunning, and capable of cruelty hidden beneath calm faces. Yalara felt the weight of their judgment pressing on her. Every glance from a courtier reminded her that she was not only a bride, but also a symbol. Her every action could be interpreted as loyalty or betrayal. Yet, she had seen Elias differently. She had begun to see him as someone who did not fight for power or glory, but fought to protect those he cared about. But peace was never simple. One evening, as the twin moons of Veyari rose over the horizon, a sudden alarm shattered the quiet of the palace. Guards shouted, and chaos erupted in the outer corridors. Assassins, trained, silent, deadly, had infiltrated the palace. Their target was clear: the human commander who now held the hand of the princess. Yalara's heart froze. She had never witnessed violence so close, so real. She watched from behind a golden pillar as blades flashed in the dim light. Men and women of the palace trained to strike with precision. Elias was there, calm but alert, moving with the grace of a predator and the precision of a veteran soldier. He did not hesitate. Every movement was purposeful, protecting Yalara and the palace. When an assassin lunged toward her hiding place, Elias was already there. He blocked the blade with his arm, taking the strike himself. Pain blossomed across his shoulder, yet he continued, moving with unstoppable energy to disarm the threat. The human who had been gentle in the Golden Hall now fought like the stories Yalara had been told. Fierce, unyielding, unstoppable. Her hands shook and she pressed them to her mouth, fearing the worst. She wanted to scream, to run, to hide, but she could not. The man she had begun to trust, the man who had never forced himself upon her, was bleeding. To protect her, the last assassin fell and silence returned. The palace guards rushed in, too late to stop the fight but ready to secure the area. Elias knelt beside Yalara, breathing hard, blood staining his robes and hands. You could have been killed," she exclaimed, her voice shaking, tears threatening to spill. She reached out instinctively to touch him but hesitated, afraid of hurting him. "I could have been," he said softly, his voice strained, yet calm. "But I would not let you be harmed. You are my wife, and I protect those I care about. Always." Yalara pressed her hands to his wounds, feeling the heat of blood and the softness of his skin beneath. Her heart ached at the realization that he had chosen her safety over his own life. For the first time, she understood the depth of his patience, his restraint, and his courage. He was not just a human. He was extraordinary, beyond any story she had heard. In that moment, fear and admiration collided. She had been terrified of him once, afraid of the strength he might wield. Now she was overwhelmed by the strength he had chosen not to wield, to protect rather than dominate, to defend rather than claim. "You fool," she whispered, shaking with emotion. "Why protect me?" Elias lifted his head, blood streaking, his cheek, and met her gaze. "Because you are mine," he said softly, yet with absolute certainty. "Not because I can take you, not because the law says so. Because you are my wife and I choose you. Always." Tears streamed down Yalara's face, but they were not just fear. They were awe, gratitude, and the slow, terrifying recognition of love. She had feared a human would be cruel, but this human had risked everything to protect her. He had proven that strength was not about dominance, but about care. The court would whisper and judge. The Veyari Empire would have its politics and intrigues, but in that moment Yalara realized the truth. Elias's heart was a fortress, and she had been welcomed into it, not as a prize, but as someone cherished, respected, and chosen. For the first time she felt safe, not just from danger but from fear itself. And in that safety she began to trust. The palace had grown quiet again, but the echoes of the attack lingered in Yalara's mind. She could not forget the way Elias had thrown himself between her and danger, how every movement of his body had been precise and protective. Yet now, in the calm that followed, she saw a different side of him, one far more powerful than any weapon. For days after the attack, Elias allowed her to tend his wounds. She pressed soft cloths to the cuts on his arms and shoulders, cleaned them carefully, and whispered words of concern. Her hands shook at first, unsure, hesitant to touch him, but every time she looked into his eyes, she saw patience, encouragement, and a quiet, unwavering love that made her chest ache. "You are stronger than I imagined," she said one afternoon, sitting beside him on the balcony as the twin moons rose over the palace gardens. Her hands brushed against his, not intentionally, but with a natural closeness that made her heart flutter. Elias smiled faintly, his hand reaching to cover hers. "Not stronger," he said softly. "Braver. Courage is not measured by strength alone. You've survived more than most. And yet you are still here, still trying. That is bravery." Her heart trembled. She had been taught all her life to obey, to hide her feelings, to fear humans. And yet here was one, standing before her, showing her kindness without expectation, trust without demand. His touch was gentle, and yet it spoke volumes. More than words, more than ceremony, more than any history of empires and wars. Yalara found herself leaning closer. She felt safe with him, safer than she had ever been with anyone, even among her own people. And for the first time she realized that this human was not a threat. He was not an enemy. He was someone who could hold her heart without breaking it. Days turned into weeks, and their quiet moments became a pattern. Elias never forced conversation, never demanded affection. He merely existed beside her, patient, caring, watching, listening. And gradually, Yalara began to let her guard down. She laughed softly when he told a small story of Earth, smiled when he pointed out constellations she had never seen before, and sometimes she found herself seeking his hand in hers. One night, as they walked along the balcony, she stopped to look at the horizon. The moons reflected in her eyes, and her veil had fallen back, revealing the face of a woman slowly discovering trust and love. Elias stayed close, his hand brushing against hers. "I was afraid of you," she admitted quietly, voice barely above, a whisper. "I thought humans were cruel, that you would destroy me." Elias turned to her, his expression soft. He lifted a gentle hand to touch her cheek, brushing away a strand of hair. "I would never destroy you," he said. "Not by my hand, not by my words, not by my will. You are free here, Yalara. Free to feel, free to live, free to choose." Her chest tightened. She had never been allowed to choose before. Her life had been dictated by duty, by empire, by fear. But now with this human beside her, she realized she had a choice. And more than that, she wanted to choose. The warmth of his hand, the softness of his voice, and the patience in his eyes broke down the last of her fear. She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. She had expected power, violence, and dominance. Instead, she found strength in gentleness, courage in patience, and love in quiet actions rather than grand gestures. Elias wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. "You are safe," he whispered. And not just from the dangers outside, but from fear itself. I will guard your heart as I guard your life. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming realization that someone could care so deeply without asking for anything in return. She pressed closer, finally allowing herself to feel the truth she had hidden even from her own heart. She was beginning to love him. That night, Yalara slept in a way she had never known. Safe, warm, cherished, and she dreamed not of chains or duty, but of possibility, of trust, and of a bond that could survive anything, even worlds apart. In Elias's gentle presence, the princess had discovered something far more powerful than fear or command. She had discovered hope, love, and the extraordinary strength of a human heart. The morning sun spilled golden light across the palace halls. Birds sang in the gardens below, but inside the great chambers, the tension of politics and expectation still lingered. Princess Yalara walked beside Elias, her hand lightly resting in his. Her silver veil was gone, revealing the face of a woman transformed, stronger, braver, and finally free to choose her own path. The Veyari court had gathered once again. Whispers filled the air, as sharp and cutting as any blade. Many expected a ceremony of obedience, a display of duty forced upon a princess who had been handed to a human as if she were a prize. They did not understand that Yalara had changed. They did not know that fear had been replaced with understanding, and hesitation with love. As she stepped forward, her eyes met Elias's. His gaze was steady, calm, and filled with warmth. She felt the rhythm of his presence, the quiet strength that had protected her through fear and danger, through uncertainty and judgment, and she knew, truly knew, that he was not only her protector but her partner, her equal, and the one who had taught her the meaning of trust. She raised her head, facing the court with a courage that came from within, not from ceremony. "I was once afraid," she said, her voice clear, resonant. "Afraid of this human, afraid of the unknown, afraid of what I could not control. But fear is not strength. Love is not weakness. And trust is the greatest power any of us can hold." The courtiers stiffened, some whispered, some frowned, but Yalara ignored them. She continued, her hand still in Elias's, feeling the steady warmth of his skin. "This union began with chains," she said, voice soft but unwavering, "but it has become something far stronger. Not by force, not by law, not by fear, but by kindness, respect, and choice. I am no longer afraid because I have chosen to walk beside him. I have chosen to trust him. I have chosen love." Elias stepped forward, his presence calm but commanding in its own way. He did not raise his voice to declare victory, nor did he attempt to dominate the room. Instead, he extended his hand toward Yalara, and the simple gesture carried a weight, heavier than any crown or treaty. "I choose her," he said quietly, "not because it is demanded, not because it is required, but because it is my choice, and I will honor, protect, and cherish her for as long as I live." A hush fell over the court. The Veyari had never seen a human speak with such gentle authority, such quiet power. They had expected conquest, force, and domination. Instead, they witnessed restraint, patience, and unwavering devotion. Yalara squeezed Elias's hand, feeling the strength of his promise. Her heart swelled with emotion, a mixture of gratitude, love, and awe. She realized that the human she had once feared had become the reason she could finally feel free. Free to love, free to hope, free to be herself. The whispers of the court grew softer, replaced by curiosity and quiet admiration. Perhaps in their fear they had underestimated humans,